Evening, folks. Justice looks exactly like this.
The rope burns felt like tiny teeth gnawing at my wrists, but that pain was nothing compared to watching my wife of 15 years adjust the camera on the tripod. She wanted to record it, my death. You know what hurts the most, Dean? Melanie's voice carried across our cabin's deck like she was discussing weekend plans. You actually believed I loved you. I tested the restraints again. The chair legs scraped against the wooden planks, inches from where the deck dropped into a 200-foot ravine. Shatter Ridge lived up to its name. One wrong step and you'd bounce off granite until there wasn't enough left to identify. The insurance money will set me free, she continued, checking her phone. Chad's waiting in Denver with the papers already drawn up. Your end note was surprisingly easy to forge. All that depression about losing work, money troubles, drinking problem you don't even have. Chad Delacroix. I should have seen it coming. The tech investor who'd been sniffing around Melanie's boutique for months offering to help with expansion. I'd built that store with my own hands, working nights after my carpentry jobs to give her the dream she wanted. How long? My voice came out hoarser than expected. 2 years. She didn't even look at me. Chad's been very patient. The pills she'd slipped into my beer was wearing off, but she didn't know that. I'd been a mechanic long enough to recognize antifreeze poisoning, the sweet taste, the drowsiness, the nausea, but she'd miscalculated the dosage for my weight. Terry knows I'm here, I lied. Melanie laughed. Terry Moon? Your drinking buddy, Sheriff? He thinks you drove up here alone to clear your head. I made sure of that. She pressed record on the camera. This is Dean Calloway on October 15th, 2024, she said in a perfect imitation of my voice. She'd been practicing. I can't take it anymore. The debt, the shame, losing everything I worked for. I'm sorry, but this is the only way. The rope around my left wrist had been tied by someone who'd never done hard labor. I'd been binding loads on truck beds since I was 16. There was always give if you knew where to look. You made one mistake, Mel. She paused the recording. What? You forgot I survived 3 tours in Middle East. The rope came free. Takes more than a housewife and her sugar daddy to put me down. I lunged before she could react. 20 years of construction work still packed into my shoulders. We went down hard, her phone skittering across the deck toward the edge. I grabbed it just as her manicured nails raked across my face. Help! Someone help me! She screamed into the wilderness. Nobody's coming, sweetheart! I pinned her arms. Just like you planned. The phone's screen showed dozens of texts between her and Chad. Photos of our house, insurance documents, bank statements, my supposed end note in her handwriting. Even a backup plan involving a hiking accident if the pills didn't work. Dean, please, we can work this out. Split everything 3 ways. 3 ways? You, me, and Chad. We can all... I stood up, leaving her sprawled on the deck. You really think I'm that stupid? Where are you going? To get some rope that'll actually hold? I walked toward the cabin. Don't move, Mel, long way down from here. But when I came back 5 minutes later, she was gone. Her car keys were missing from the kitchen counter. Tire tracks in the dirt showed she'd floored it down the mountain road, probably heading straight to Chad with some story about me attacking her. They'd have the police looking for a dangerous, unstable husband within the hour. I stood on the deck where I was supposed to end, watching the sun set over the Colorado peaks. The camera was still there, still recording. I walked over and looked directly into the lens. This is Dean Calloway. Today my wife tried to murder me for insurance money, but I survived. I picked up the camera. Now it's my turn. 3 hours later, I was end. At least, according to the Denver Post's online obituary that Terry would file after finding my truck at the bottom of Miller's Gorge, 20 miles from our cabin. The explosion would be blamed on a faulty propane tank I'd been transporting for a job. Nobody recovered due to the intensity of the fire and the depth of the ravine. But I wasn't in that truck when it went over. I was sitting in a stolen pickup at a truck stop in Pueblo, reading about my own death on a burner phone. The obituary was beautiful. Melanie had really outdone herself describing our perfect marriage and her devastating loss. The memorial service would be held Thursday at Riverside Chapel. In lieu of flowers, donations could be made to the Dean Calloway Memorial Fund she'd already established. My life insurance policy was worth $400,000. I drove to Denver and rented a storage unit under the name Tom Mitchell, my grandfather's real name before he changed it after the war. Paid 6 months in advance with cash I'd kept hidden from Melanie in an old toolbox. She thought I was bad with money, but growing up in foster care teaches you to always have an escape fund. The storage unit became my base of operations. I filled it with everything I'd need: camping gear, tools, changes of clothes, and a laptop I'd bought from a pawn shop. Most importantly, I had Melanie's phone with all those texts and photos. But I wanted more than evidence. I wanted justice. And justice, I was learning, looked a lot like revenge. The first week after my death, I followed Melanie everywhere. She played the grieving widow perfectly, crying at the right moments, accepting casseroles from neighbors, wearing black to the grocery store. But every night she drove to Chad's penthouse downtown and stayed until morning. Chad Delacroix lived like a king. Tech investor, private arms dealer, the kind of man who thought money made him untouchable. His penthouse had a view of the entire city, and he threw parties where politicians and businessmen made deals worth millions. But Chad had secrets. I spent 3 weeks learning his routine, following his associates, digging through his business records at the city clerk's office. Turns out Mr. Delacroix had been selling military-grade tools to buyers who weren't supposed to have them. The FBI would be very interested in his client list if they knew it existed. More importantly, Chad had an ex-wife. Lisa Delacroix lived in a rundown apartment complex on the wrong side of town, surviving on alimony payments and whatever prescription pills she could buy from her neighbors. Chad had destroyed her in their divorce, taking their house, their kids, even her car. She'd attempted end twice in the past year. She was perfect. I knocked on Lisa's door on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing a cheap suit and carrying a briefcase full of legal documents I'd printed at the library. "Miss Delacroix, my name is Tom Mitchell from Hartwell and Associates. I represent several of your ex-husband's former business partners." Lisa looked exactly like Chad's type. Blonde, broken, desperate. The kind of woman he'd use and discard when someone younger came along. "What do you want? May I come in? This concerns a substantial settlement you may be entitled to." Her apartment smelled like cigarettes and despair. Empty pill bottles covered the coffee table, and legal documents from her divorce were scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. "Chad owes you more than alimony," I told her, opening the briefcase. "He's been hiding assets in offshore accounts. We have proof." The documents looked official because I'd copied the format from real legal papers. Lisa's eyes widened as she read through pages describing Chad's hidden fortune and her rightful claim to millions of dollars. "This can't be real." "It's very real. But there's a problem." I leaned forward. "He's about to marry again. Once that happens, his new wife becomes the primary beneficiary of his estate." "Marry who?" I showed her a photo from Melanie's Facebook page, the two of them at a restaurant last week, her engagement ring clearly visible. "Some widow named Melanie Calloway. She's already moved into his place." Lisa's hands began to shake. "He promised me he'd never remarry, swore it in court. Men like Chad make a lot of promises." I gathered the fake documents. "The good news is you still have legal options, but you'd need to act fast." "What kind of options?" "A new lawsuit could freeze his assets pending investigation, but it would require substantial legal fees up front. And frankly, Miss Delacroix, you don't look like you have that kind of money." Lisa's face crumpled. "I don't have anything. He took everything." "There is another way." I paused dramatically. "Chad has been selling illegal tools to foreign buyers. If someone were to provide evidence of his activities to the FBI, they'd seize his assets as proceeds from criminal activity. You'd be entitled to compensation as a victim of his crimes." "Evidence like what?" I pulled out a thumb drive. "Client lists, transaction records, shipping manifests, everything needed to put him away for life." "Where did you get this?" "Let's just say Mr. Delacroix has made many enemies." I stood to leave. "But this window won't stay open long. Once he marries the widow, she'll have legal protections that could tie up any investigation for years." Lisa clutched the thumb drive like a lifeline. "What do I need to do?" "Nothing illegal. Just deliver this to the FBI field office downtown. Tell them you found it in your husband's old papers. They'll do the rest." "Will this really work?" I met her eyes. "Chad destroyed your life because he thought no one would fight back. Time to prove him wrong." 3 days later, Lisa Delacroix was found end in her apartment from an apparent overdose. The thumb drive was still in her purse, along with an end note confessing to making false accusations against her ex-husband. The note was in her handwriting because I'd made her practice writing it. She thought she was copying a rough draft of the FBI complaint. Melanie called Chad immediately after the news broke. I listened to their conversation from the bug I'd planted in his penthouse while they were out shopping for wedding rings. "This is too much of a coincidence," Melanie said. "First Dean and now Lisa." Lisa was unstable. Everyone knew she'd try something like this eventually. But why now, right when we're getting married? Guilt? She couldn't handle being happy when she was miserable. They were both quiet for a moment. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding," Melanie said. "Absolutely not. We've waited long enough." "Chad, what if someone's watching us?" "Who, your late husband?" They both laughed at that. I didn't. The next morning, Melanie's boutique burned to the ground. The fire started in the basement around 3 a.m., right where I'd spliced into the electrical main. By the time the fire department arrived, the whole building was engulfed. The insurance investigator would blame faulty wiring. An old building with outdated electrical systems was a disaster waiting to happen. But the message I left was clear enough. I'd spray painted "Remember the Ridge" across the sidewalk in red paint before the flames consumed everything. When the police arrived, they assumed it was gang graffiti and power washed it away. Melanie knew better. She called Chad at 6 a.m., hysterical. "He's alive! Dean's alive! That's impossible. Terry identified his truck at the bottom of the gorge." Then explained the message. "Remember the Ridge. Only Dean would know about that. Lots of people knew you had a cabin up there. Nobody called it the Ridge except him." I smiled, listening to her panic through the bug in Chad's phone. She was starting to crack. "Even if he survived the crash somehow," Chad said, "he's probably brain damaged, hiding in the woods somewhere. We just need to what? We tried to end him, Chad. If he's alive and knows what we did, he can't prove anything. No evidence, no witnesses, just the word of a endman." "I'm scared." "Don't be. I'm hiring someone to handle this." The someone Chad hired was a man named Vincent Carver, who specialized in making problems disappear. Ex-military, no family, no permanent address. The kind of contractor who worked exclusively with cash and never left witnesses. Carver was good at his job, but he'd never hunted someone who'd been hunting him first. I'd been following Chad's phone calls for 2 weeks, so I knew exactly when and where Carver planned to ambush me. He thought I was hiding in the mountains near our old cabin, waiting for a chance to attack Melanie and Chad. He was wrong. I was waiting for him at the bottom of Dead Man's Curve on Highway 285, where the road twisted through a narrow canyon with no cell service. Perfect spot for a car accident. Carver drove a black SUV with tinted windows and enough armor plating to stop rifle rounds. But armor doesn't help when a logging truck runs you off the road at 60 miles per hour. The crash made the evening news. Mysterious single-vehicle accident claims life of Denver man. The reporter mentioned that Vincent Carver had been driving alone when his SUV somehow flipped and rolled down a steep embankment. Investigators blamed icy conditions and excessive speed. They found his body 3 days later, after the crows were finished. I made sure Chad saw the news report. His penthouse had a huge TV visible from the building across the street, and I'd bought a good pair of binoculars. Watched his face go white when the reporter mentioned Carver's name. His phone rang immediately. Melanie again. "Did you see the news?" "Yeah, I saw it." "That's not a coincidence, Chad. Someone ended him. Vincent was a professional. He knew the risks. What if we're next?" "We're not next. We're leaving." "Leaving? Where?" "I bought a place in Costa Rica last year. No extradition treaty, plenty of privacy. We can disappear until this blows over. I can't just abandon my whole life. Your life here's over, Mel. Look around. Your store burned down, your husband came back from the end, and now people are dying. Time to go." I listened to them argue for another 20 minutes before hanging up. They were planning to leave in 3 days, taking a private jet from a small airfield outside Denver, just enough time to liquidate their assets and transfer the money offshore. But I wasn't done with them yet, because I'd found Zeke. Zeke was a 16-year-old runaway I'd discovered sleeping in my storage unit. Kid had been living on the streets for months, ever since aging out of his last foster home. Smart, tough, and completely invisible to the system. "You can crash here for a while," I told him. "But I need something in return." "Like what?" Help with a project. Zeke listened while I explained about Melanie and Chad, about the insurance fraud and the murder attempts. I showed him the evidence, the texts, the photos, the recorded conversations. So you're like getting revenge or whatever? Something like that. Cool, what do you need? The kid was fearless. Exactly what I needed for the final phase. Chad and Melanie were staying at the Quarry Lodge while they waited for their flight, a luxury resort in the mountains where wealthy people went to disappear from their problems. The lodge was isolated, private, and impossible to reach without going through the main gate, unless you knew about the old mining tunnels that connected to the basement. I'd discovered the tunnels during my 3 weeks of surveillance, exploring every possible entry and exit point. The resort was built on the site of an abandoned silver mine, and the original owners had incorporated some of the existing structures into their design. Most of the tunnels were sealed off, but I'd found one that led directly under the main building. Zeke's job was simple: get inside the lodge, plant listening devices in Chad and Melanie's suite, and report on their movements. His age and appearance made him perfect for the role, just another kid from a wealthy family whose parents had sent him away for the weekend. What if they catch me? They won't. You're smarter than they are. And if something goes wrong, then you run. But nothing's going wrong. I was lying about that last part. Zeke placed the bugs perfectly. Within hours, I was listening to every conversation in their suite. Chad was making final arrangements with offshore banks while Melanie packed her jewelry and cash. They planned to leave the next morning, driving to the airport at dawn. But first, Chad was throwing a party. He'd invited a dozen business associates to the lodge for what he called a celebration dinner. Politicians, arms dealers, money launderers, all the people who'd helped make him rich and kept him out of prison. One last gathering before he disappeared forever. The party was scheduled for 8 p.m. in the lodge's private dining room. Perfect timing for what I had planned. I entered the lodge through the mining tunnel at 7:30, wearing a waiter's uniform I'd stolen from their laundry service. The basement was full of wine storage and kitchen equipment, but no security cameras. I made my way upstairs and positioned myself in the service corridor that ran behind the dining room. Chad stood at the head of a long table, raising a glass of champagne to his guests. Gentlemen, ladies, tonight we celebrate the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, to new horizons and unlimited possibilities. To Chad, someone replied, and they all drank. Melanie sat at his right side, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. She looked nervous, constantly checking her phone and glancing toward the exits. Relax, darling, Chad whispered to her. After tomorrow, all our troubles will be behind us. I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. By who? Your late husband? He's been in for over a month. Then who ended Vincent? Who burned down my store? Random violence, bad luck. Denver's becoming a dangerous city. I waited until they'd finished the first course before making my move. The lights went out suddenly, plunging the dining room into complete darkness. Emergency generators kicked in 30 seconds later, but that was enough time. When the lights came back on, I was standing in the doorway with a tool pointed at Chad's chest. Evening, folks. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Several guests screamed. 2 men reached for concealed tools, but stopped when I swung the barrel toward them. Hands on the table where I can see them, I said. Anyone moves, anyone reaches for a phone, Mr. Delacroix gets a new hole in his chest. Dean, Melanie's voice was barely a whisper. Hello, sweetheart. Miss me? Chad remained seated, but his face had gone pale. You're supposed to be Enda. Lot of things were supposed to happen. You were supposed to be a faithful business partner to your clients. Melanie was supposed to be a loving wife. Vincent Carver was supposed to be a professional butcher. I smiled. Turns out we're all full of surprises. What do you want? Justice. This isn't justice, it's terrorism. Depends on your perspective. I moved closer to the table. See, from where I'm standing, justice looks exactly like this. The people who tried to murder me, trapped in a room with no escape, finally facing consequences for their actions. We didn't try to murder you. Really? Then what do you call sedating someone and leaving them tied to a chair near a 200-foot drop? Melanie started crying. Real tears this time. Not the performance she'd been giving since my funeral. That was never supposed to happen, she sobbed. Chad said it would look like an end, that you wouldn't suffer. Chad said a lot of things, didn't he? Like how much he loved you. How you'd be happy together once I was out of the picture. I do love her, Chad said. No, you don't. You love her insurance money and the property she inherited when I end. Just like you loved Lisa until you found someone with a bigger payout. Lisa ended herself. Lisa ended herself because I convinced her you were about to marry another woman and steal her settlement money. She ended believing her last chance for justice had been taken away. The room went completely silent. You ended Lisa? Melanie stared at me in horror. I gave her a choice. Live with what Chad did to her or take revenge. She chose revenge, then couldn't live with herself afterward. I shrugged. Not my fault she was weak. You're insane. Maybe. Or maybe I just learned something important. The system doesn't protect people like me from people like you. Courts favor whoever has the most expensive lawyers. Police believe whoever has the most political connections. Justice isn't blind. It's bought and paid for. So you decided to become judge, jury, and executioner? Someone had to. Chad slowly reached into his jacket. I let him, curious what he thought he could do. Don't, Melanie whispered. It's okay. Chad pulled out a thick envelope. Dean, you want money? I've got cash, lots of it. Enough to disappear and start over somewhere new. How much? 500,000, right here, right now. He placed the envelope on the table. Several of his guests shifted nervously, probably wondering if they were about to witness a negotiation or an execution. That's generous, I said. What's the catch? No catch. You take the money, walk out that door, and we never see each other again. And Melanie? Melanie comes with me. You two are finished anyway. I looked at my wife of 15 years, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who'd tried to have me ended for insurance money. What do you think, Mel? Fair deal? She looked between Chad and me, calculating her options. I think I want to go home. Chad's face darkened. Home? Your home burned down, remember? I mean really home. Back to my sister in California. Away from all this. That's not part of the deal. Maybe it should be, I said. Melanie goes to California, you disappear to Costa Rica, and I take your money. Everyone gets what they want. Except justice, Chad said. Justice is what I make it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Zeke's voice crackled through my earpiece. Dean, we got a problem. Sheriff's department just pulled up outside. Looks like someone called in a disturbance. Terry Moon. My old army buddy had finally put the pieces together. Time's up, I announced. Everyone stay seated and keep your hands visible. Dean, don't do this, Melanie pleaded. We can still work something out. We had 15 years to work something out. You chose differently. I heard boots in the corridor outside, moving fast. Terry's voice barked orders to his deputies. Surround the building. Cover all exits. Nobody goes in or out until I give the all clear. Chad smiled. Looks like your plan just fell apart. Did it? I pulled a small device from my pocket and showed it to the room. A detonator, connected to the charges I'd placed throughout the building while they were eating dinner. Here's the thing about old mining operations, I said conversationally. They used a lot of dynamite. Some of it gets left behind in forgotten storage rooms. You're bluffing. Want to find out? The dining room door burst open and Terry stepped inside, tool drawn. 2 deputies flanked him, also armed. Dean Calloway put down the tool. Hello, Terry. Took you long enough. I know what you've been doing. The truck in Miller's Gorge, the fake death, Vincent Carver's accident, all of it. Prove it. I don't need to prove it. I just need to stop you. Terry looked older than when I'd seen him last, more tired. Being a sheriff in a small Colorado county wasn't supposed to involve hunting endmen who'd come back for revenge. These people tried to murder me, I said. Where were you when I needed protection? You never came to me for help. Would it have mattered? Chad's got judges and prosecutors on his payroll. You think your word would have meant anything against his lawyers? We'll never know now, will we? Terry was right about that. I'd chosen my path the moment I decided to fake my own death instead of trusting the system. Put the tool down, Dean. Let's end this peaceful. Can't do that, Terry. Why not? Because they'll never pay for what they did. Chad will buy his way out of any charges, Melanie will claim she was coerced, and in 6 months they'll be living on a beach somewhere spending my insurance money. That's not your decision to make. It is now. I pressed the button. The explosions started in the basement and worked their way up. Old dynamite burns hot and fast, turning wooden support beams into matchsticks in seconds. The building shuddered, then began to collapse in on itself. "Everyone out!" Terry screamed. People ran for the exits, but the corridor was already filling with smoke. Terry grabbed Melanie and pushed her toward a window, while his deputies tried to evacuate Chad's guests. I stayed in the dining room, watching my wife disappear into the chaos. She looked back once before Terry pulled her to safety. Not love in her eyes, not regret, just fear. Chad wasn't so lucky. A burning beam fell across the doorway, trapping him in the dining room with me. He pressed himself against the far wall, coughing from the smoke. "This is insane. You'll end us both." "That's the plan." "Why? What does this accomplish?" "Justice." "This isn't justice. This is an end." "Maybe, but at least you won't be around to hurt anyone else." The ceiling began to sag as more support beams gave way. We had maybe 2 minutes before the whole room collapsed. Chad pulled out a pistol I hadn't known he was carrying. "I'm not dying here." "Yes, you are." He fired twice. The first blast went wide, but the second struck my shoulder, spinning me around. I dropped the tool and fell against the wall. "Should have taken the money," Chad said, moving toward me. He didn't see Zeke come through the window behind him. The kid hit Chad with a piece of burning wood, driving him to his knees. Then he grabbed my tool and pointed it at Chad's head. "Don't," I gasped. "You're not a butcher." "Neither were you once." "I still had a choice. You still do." Zeke hesitated, looking between Chad and me. The building groaned around us as more of the structure gave way. "We need to go," he said finally. "I'm not leaving." "Why not?" "Because this is how it ends." I could hear Terry shouting my name from outside, could see flashlight beams through the smoke. They were trying to find a way back in, but the fire was spreading too fast. "Go," I told Zeke. "Get out of here." "What about him?" Zeke gestured toward Chad, who was unconscious now from the smoke and the blow to his head. "Leave him. Dean, go." Zeke climbed back through the window and disappeared into the night. Smart kid. He'd survive whatever came next. I sat down in one of the dining room chairs, my back against the wall. The shoulder wound kept seeping steadily, but it didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except watching the flames consume everything Chad had built with dirty money. The ceiling finally came down around 2 a.m., according to the fire department's official report. By then, the building was a total loss. They found Chad's body in the dining room, burned beyond recognition. They never found mine, because I wasn't there when the ceiling collapsed. Zeke had come back for me. The kid dragged me through the window just seconds before the room caved in, then helped me crawl through the mining tunnels to safety. We emerged from an abandoned shaft 2 miles from the lodge, far from the emergency responders and TV cameras. "Why?" I asked him, as he bandaged my shoulder with strips torn from his shirt. "Because you were right about one thing. The system doesn't protect people like us from people like them. That doesn't make what I did right. Doesn't make it wrong either." We watched the lodge burn from our position on the hillside. Fire trucks sprayed water onto the ruins, but there was nothing left to save. Terry stood near his patrol car, talking to federal agents who'd arrived to investigate the explosion. "What happens now?" Zeke asked. "Now you disappear. Find a new city, a new name, a new life." "What about you?" "I'm already end, remember?" 3 months later, a package arrived at Terry Moon's office containing detailed evidence of Chad Delacroix's illegal arms-dealing operation. Client lists, transaction records, bank statements, everything needed to shut down his network and prosecute his associates. The FBI arrested 12 people, including 2 state senators and a federal judge. The investigation revealed corruption going back decades, with Chad at the center of a conspiracy that had sold tools to terrorist organizations worldwide. Melanie was never charged. She testified against Chad's associates in exchange for immunity, claiming she'd been an unwitting victim of his schemes. She moved to California and opened a small flower shop with the life insurance money from my death. Lisa Delacroix was posthumously cleared of all charges and recognized as a whistleblower whose information had helped expose the conspiracy. A memorial fund was established in her name to help other victims of domestic violence. Terry retired early and moved to Florida. He never spoke publicly about the case, but his final report concluded that Dean Calloway had ended in the Quarry Lodge fire while attempting to stop Chad Delacroix from fleeing the country. And maybe that was true in a way. The man I used to be, the loyal husband, the honest worker, the believer in justice, had ended that night on the mountain. What survived was something different, something harder. I became someone who helped people the system had failed. Someone who made sure that people like Chad Delacroix couldn't hurt innocents anymore. Someone who understood that sometimes justice required getting your hands dirty. The world thought Dean Calloway was end. They were right. But what they didn't know was that from those ashes, something new had been born. Something that wealthy predators and corrupt officials would learn to fear. Something that would never stop hunting.